Hey YouTube, it's Elsa. I'm here with the brilliant Lodias, and we figured we should do a little video on the history of Hellenistic astrology. We got this channel, we dubbed up on having this YouTube channel, Hellenistic Astrology. So Lo had the idea, and a brilliant one at that, that we should start with a little bit of a treatment on Hellenistic astrology. We will include like links below to Chris Brennan does like a 3-hour treatment, and of course in his book, which everyone who's here probably, unless you're just like an observer and curious on the outside, will know this book, Hellenistic Astrology by Chris Brennan. And the whole like first third is going deeply into the history. So we're not trying to do this comprehensive like a deep dive. We're just doing a little bit of due diligence for the channel, taking the name Hellenistic Astrology. And for most people that come here, again, are going to be interested in the topic. So it might be a review for you, but if people are sort of curious and interested, we just wanted to make sure that we did a little basic overview. Is that kind of what you're thinking? You have anything, Lo?
Yeah, I think definitely the historical perspective is always important when we're dealing with astrology, especially traditional astrology. But also, yeah, we're trying to kind of define Hellenistic astrology, both in its historical terms as well as in the techniques that we use that have their source in this time period. So it's very much just like just contextualizing Hellenistic astrology as well as defining what it is in a more practical level as well.
Yeah, it is important. So I forgot to maybe say, I don't know if we'll do this for all the videos, but it's August 5th. Thursday, we've got Jupiter's Day here. We feel good about that. Is there anything you want to add before we just jump into the history?
No, yeah, I'm excited.
Okay. Yeah, I know. One of our first videos, we're like, like jitter. Okay, so let's do it. Let's go.
So, Hellenistic astrology, very broadly defined, is the astrology that originated itself in the Mediterranean area, within the framework of within the frame of the 4th century BCE and the end of the Roman Empire. So that period of history is basically the Hellenistic period in terms of astrology. It's the astrology that originated in that time period and in that area, and that was a result of all of the cultural things that were being developed in that area of the world during that time.
And totally, and it had a little bit of a, and not to interrupt you in your flow, but it sort of is birthed out of the rich tradition in Egypt as well. So we have, and maybe we'll get into that, but we have this Deccan system of a living sky in Egypt at that time. And then so I'll let you continue.
Yeah. So yeah, Hellenistic astrology, if you're going to look at the texts, the Hellenistic things that are referenced, they are within that time frame of the 4th century BCE and the 7th century CE. So it's that time period. But yeah, like Elsa was referring to, it originated out of both the Mesopotamian school of astrology and tradition, as well as the Egyptian tradition. So there was, like I said, there was a lot of cultural intermingling at that time that resulted in this very specific system that is Hellenistic astrology coming forth and showing up as a way of as a practice that syncretized all of these different cultural traditions within one framework, and the framework that's very specific. So not only in terms of Mesopotamian astrology, but also Egyptian astrology and Greek philosophy, and very important to Hellenistic astrology, and Hellenistic Greek mystery traditions as well were very important. So all of that got turned into a very specific system that then originated what we call Western astrology in terms of tradition. And what's important to say as well is that this astrology in this time, it is it has the same fundamental structure than like modern astrology has today. So we see things like aspects and houses and signs and planets, like that fourfold system that people call it. That was originated at this time. And this is like Hellenistic astrology, basically. Hellenistic astrology is the beginning of this system that developed over the 2000 years after that, within a framework that's more or less recognizable. Before, we had little pieces that were brought together that we're going to talk more about in just a moment, from the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians and stuff, but then it coming into a mechanism that has a specificity that Western astrology has, that was only in the Hellenistic period that it kind of became one apparatus.
Yeah, so it's like the seed essentially of Western astrology as we know it. I mean, it's had a lot of changes. I'm sure we're going to go through all the changes and what separates it apart from the other sort of classics and modern astrology today. But as we understand it, it is and I think we're not going out on a limb to say this, it is the seed place of the developed fourfold Western tradition as we know it.
Yes, yeah, and that's a very important, and that's a lot of the reason why people thought that Hellenistic astrology was worthwhile in the first place, was because it was this place of origin of Western astrology. So when you study Hellenistic astrology, you're understanding the very basis upon which all astrologies that came after within the Western tradition developed out of. So that's why it's very important, independently of whether you're going to actually follow the techniques, the Hellenistic techniques or not. It's very important to just know how they originated and all those things. It's very important to have that inform your practice in general.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, obviously, obviously we're into it, but I'd say for anyone, no matter your approach in Western, and even, I don't know how much we're going to get into this, but I'm sure that creative space that was happening in the Hellenistic period at that time, I mean, and this has a bunch of stuff that I'm probably not equipped to talk about, but even within the Vedic tradition, right? Even within the Indian astrology tradition, or Jyotish, things were developing in this same period.
Yes.
Great. Awesome.
So so to talk a little bit more about the details of the history. So the oldest astrology that is connected to the Western tradition is Mesopotamian astrology, which had its origins around 3000 BCE, and it was based on omens. So it was an omen-based astrology where they built statements that said things like, if there's an eclipse of the sun, the king will die, things like that. That's like the classic example that everyone refers to. So it was based on observing the sky every night and seeing celestial events and somehow correlating them to the earthly realm. So it wasn't so much like a causal system. It was more of a correlation-based system. So the stars and the planets were seen as emissaries of the gods somehow, that then spoke to people through their appearances and disappearances. And then correlated with events. Then they announced something. So that was a very important period of astrology, because that's where we see the zodiac showing up later on, and also just the systematization of astrology. The early systematizations of astrology were Mesopotamian, because they started building a big library of those omens where they collected like correlations and things like that. And eventually, around 750 BCE, I think it was a bit earlier, but like 750 BCE was the peak of this period that astrology became this state organized endeavor. So basically the kings funded astrologers to do research in astrology and give them reports of what the sky was saying. So it was something that was very valued culturally and was very it was seen as very valuable. And they had these priests that then observed everything and gave the reports to the kings, and they had loads of different astrologers, and it's turned into a bigger and bigger thing. And then obviously they started, mapping the sky in terms of building making the first ephemerides and things like that. So that those were the Mesopotamians that did it. And yeah, so it was very, very important. And it turned both for in terms of astrology and astronomy, because obviously they had to like be very clear on where the planets were, and they managed to learn how to predict where they were going to be in the future and where they, and things like that. So yeah, that was like one piece that then informed the Hellenistic tradition. The names of the planets originated from them. They then turned into, they were first translated into Greek deities. So they had the names for Babylonian deities, and then into Greek deities, and then into the Roman deities that we have today. And also, yeah, and like I said, they did build the zodiac. Most historians, it's pretty much accepted that the zodiac originated with the Mesopotamians as well. So those pieces of the tradition we kind of owe to them.
It never stops getting interesting either. I love how you're laying it out. It is it's beautiful and important. So yeah.
Yeah,
great.
and so we have that on one hand, and like the omens that they had were very based on how the planets appeared. So like, things like, oh, is there a halo around the moon? And do we have I don't know, a specific star within the halo of the moon? And that's going to mean something. So it had that aspect, but it also eventually developed into how do I call it? Into like something that was based on the secondary motion, because they build the zodiac. So the secondary motion is the movement of the planets through the ecliptic. So it's like the sun going from sign to sign, basically, in the way that we understand it today. And they started having that become more and more of a prominent thing within their astrology, and then eventually leading to the zodiac. So like when planets align to specific stars and specific constellations and everything like that. So that was the part of the Mesopotamians. On the other hand, we have the Egyptians that were doing their own thing simultaneously. And the Egyptian system was a lot more based on the primary motion. So the diurnal motion, the motion of the sun rising, culminating and setting. Which was associated to the decans, which is what Elsa was referring to. So they used it mainly to time rituals in their religions. So, when these decans, which were parts of the sky, basically slices of the sky, like the zodiac signs, they contain specific fixed stars. And then when these fixed stars either rose or culminated or things like that, they would use that to time rituals. And that was something that they took very, very seriously. So they had to be very precise in how they calculated their calendars, what time they did things on a daily basis, like things like that. And also the appearance and disappearance of certain specific stars was very relevant. So when you had the sun coming closer to specific stars, that would make the stars disappear and then appear again. So like the heliacal rise or set of the stars were very important to them, and things like that. So, we had those two pieces. We have the Mesopotamians on the one hand prioritizing the secondary motion in the zodiac, and then the Egyptians on the other with the primary motion, which is associated to the houses. And then that later came together with the conquests of Alexander the Great. So like around, I think the 4th century, which is the beginning of this period, Alexander the Great did his thing. He conquered like all of the Mediterranean basically very quickly over like 10 years. Yeah. So, and then he was instructed he wasn't Greek himself. I think he was Macedonian, but he was instructed in Greek philosophy and Greek culture. I think he had like Aristotle as a tutor and stuff. And he just conquered all of this land really quickly, and then died like mysteriously. And then they had all of this land put together. He institutionalized Greek as the language of like cultured people and knowledge within all these different places. And started basically due to the conquests to create a lot of communication between the different traditions that existed within that space. And then after he died, all of those pieces of land got like pieced. They got separated into different commanders of his army. Basically, they didn't know who was going to take the empire, so they split it all into different like slices of land, and each of them became like a kingdom to one of these military commanders. And yeah, so then we have like that kind of fragmented, but then at the same time, he did his job of institutionalizing Greek as the language and as and Greek knowledge as the foundation of what's like legit, basically, at that time. So from that, all of those cultures started talking and coming together in Egypt, which was a very important location. So they founded a city that had his name, that was called Alexandria, in the honor of Alexander the Great. And then there they had the famous like Library of Alexandria, where they did a lot of collection of where they collected a lot of like every text that they could find and things like that. Because they had the ruler there, Ptolemy, not Ptolemy the astrologer, different Ptolemy, was like really valued like knowledge and stuff. So he like put a lot of money into the library and into them doing whatever they could to like gain more knowledge about things in general. So within that context, we have that the origins of Hellenistic astrology. So we have those pieces about the Mesopotamian system, we have the pieces from the Egyptian system, we have Greek philosophy and Greek thinking in general coming into play, and the mystery traditions as well. And then all of that somehow generated Hellenistic astrology, which was, I think it was like the 1st century BCE with like the original texts are set to date. So things like what are the names? Nechepso and Periciris, Hermes, Trismegistus, what else? What's the other one? Asclepius, and is there another one?
Probably, but it's
those
the beams, and I'm like,
yeah, they're like these texts that have names of like mythical figures assigned to them that supposedly gave the original doctrines of Hellenistic astrology, showing up around that time. Before that, we have some evidence that there was already a lot of that happening with the mixing and stuff, because of the first horoscopes that started showing up before, and horoscopes are basically charts that have an ascendant. And that's a very important part of our system. So, we call it like horoscopic astrology because of that. So, that that was already happening. And then there was this flourishing of all these base texts showing up that were said to be written by these mythical figures like Hermes, and like, I think Nechepso and Periciris, like one of them was supposed to be a pharaoh and the other one like his priest or something. And then from those and those are texts that we don't have access to today because they were lost, but we have references to them by later authors. But basically the earliest author that we do have a text of, it's Manilius. It's Manilius's Astronomica, and I think it's the 1st century. Anyway, it's around like the end of the beginning of the Common Era. I have a feeling it's BCE, but I might be wrong. And then you have Valens and what's the other one? Dorotheus coming up in the CE. Like, I think Dorotheus is the other earliest one, which is like, then it's 1st century BCE, and Valens might be 2nd century BCE. And then we have Ptolemy, which is very important with the Tetrabiblos. It's one of the most important texts that survived from the Hellenistic tradition throughout this whole time. Like, basically people had uninterrupted access to Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos throughout the history of astrology, because Ptolemy was such a big scientist at the time. So yeah, so then we have those main texts, and then it just develops more, and then we have the textual evidence that, the translations that we have today and stuff just getting more and more common from that period onward. And then and then it ends, the period that we consider the Hellenistic era in astrology ends around when the Roman Empire falls, because then astrology is, before that, astrology was getting demonized because of Christianity. There was a lot of conflict around that, but then and then the Roman Empire falls to the Arabs, and then the Arabs take over, and then it starts like a whole other part of astrology, which is very important as well. Like the Arab contribution to the development of this craft was very, very important, and it came and they had access to all the Greek material as well. But then that starts a different period. That's considered then medieval astrology. So it's only this period that's Hellenistic.
Yeah, that was really good. Yeah, thank you for that. And I just want to say that the Arabic tradition, I mean, even as Hellenistic astrologers, and as this channel develops, I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about, some of the Arabic translations and stuff like this, because they do really care about the tradition. They don't come, I mean, they might come in and do their thing, but they really are true to trying to keep some of those tradition, the Hellenistic documents alive as best they can. So we'll get into that later, but okay, great. That was
I'm a big fan of the Arabic like contribution in general. It's very they knew what they were doing. They had access to the things. They've really valued like Greek philosophy and Greek knowledge in general, so they were really trying to honor that, like in their writings, which is something that you don't see as much in the later texts, because the transmission of the tradition got really diffuse. Like the longer it passes after this period, the less access they have to the original Hellenistic text. So then they start basically doing their own thing, which isn't bad, but it's just different from the original tradition. And it just gets more and more different. And then we get to the Hellenistic revival that we're going through now, which is something that you're going to talk about more.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I don't want to, I didn't do a whole bunch of research on what jumps us from Hellenistic through the medieval period, through the whole Latin period. And I kind of prepared a little bit more about talking about where we are today and the revival of some of these things as they come into the Western world. So then we have, I mean, we'll again do links with Chris Brennan does like a full treatment of the historical timeline of astrology itself, but just focusing on the Hellenistic stuff that we've got going on today.
Because sorry to interrupt. It's just because we're not really trying to do like a whole like history of astrology. It's just like basically the important part is there was all this Greek stuff mixed with all these other cultures, happened in this time period from like 4th century BCE to 7th century CE. We have those texts. Then they basically got less and less available throughout the ages, up until the point that people had no access to them, like around circa like early 20th century, 19th century. And then, we had no access to them for a very, very long time, basically. And then now we're going through this revival, which is really exciting.
It is so fun. I'm so happy to be a part of it. And I think that's part of the reason that even sparked this channel or sparked this conversation is that we feel so blessed to be a part of this tradition, and it's good for all astrologers that it's coming back up. So I don't know like a full treatment. I don't know everything about the history, which I'd like to do some interviews with like our modern day teachers, a little bit more about their teachers and a little bit more about these translation projects and stuff. So, I mean, shout out to our teachers. Let's get some interviews going.
Laughs, like just nervous laugh. Like
I know, we're like, okay. Yeah. So then we've got, I guess, and you can help me with this a little bit, but I have a couple names here that I guess it's kind of starting around the 1980s in the 1990s. So we've got James Holden, which I know he was a historian and an astrologer that wrote a paper in 1982 called Ancient House Division, where he did a translation on whole sign houses. And Chris Brennan says that he's maybe, in Chris Brennan's estimation, that he was the first one to explicitly say in English here in the West that whole sign houses were a thing. And they do talk about this in a recent interview on the Astrology podcast. They like kind of mention it a little bit with Lewis. What is his?
Oh, Rivera. Yeah.
Yeah, they do a little bit of a talk on it, like where it might have been sort of implied and known in Europe or to some of the German astrologers, but again, that was translated into German. And so we've got James Holden with Chris Brennan saying that he attributes him as the first to point out and translate like whole sign houses or signs as counting being a thing and being this primary system that was used in the Hellenistic tradition. So that's like one big like point. And then we've got Robert Zoller, who studied and worked under Zoltan Mason in New York. And I believe he heavily relied on John Baptiste Morin or Morinus for his work. And then Robert Zoller was studying under him, and then later went on to be inspired and do some translations of his own. So I think that was in, I don't know exactly the dates of like his work with his teacher, but Robert Zoller translated the work of Bonatti. And in 1992, he met up with the other Ravs, so Robert Hand and Robert Schmidt, who we can go into. I think Robert Hand and Robert Zoller both had a strong history in astrology up until this time, but Robert Schmidt was like a mathematician, and I don't know about a historian, but he was into classics and stuff like this, but he also had a language background. So the three of them were like kind of like dorking out on all this stuff and decided to do a translation project called Project Hindsight. And then, that lasted a while, and I think they had some other translation projects in the works at that time. Project Hindsight was funded by the astrological community, and it was like a boom a little bit in having any sort of interest in trying for ourselves to translate this ancient material. And they were finding out all this stuff. And so in that period of time where the three of them were together at Project Hindsight, they inspired, as far as I know, at least dabbling in Project Hindsight or being introduced through Project Hindsight, most of the teachers that we have today, to greater or lesser extent. So we've got, Chris Brent, I'm just going to list, I think a lot of people that at least knew about it or went to some of the conclaves or were inspired by, to a greater or lesser extent, Robert Schmidt's work or Robert Zoller. Like Robert Zoller was I don't know about primary teacher, but a strong influence in Benjamin Dykes, Dr. Benjamin Dykes, who's a extremely valued translator in our time and teacher for us. I know he focuses a little bit more on the medieval and the Arabic translations. Same with Christopher Warnock, and I don't know Christopher Warnock's involvement with Project Hindsight, but I know that they were both students of Robert Zoller. And then we have, Dimitri George, Chris Brennan, Austin Coppock, I think probably a little bit Benjamin Dykes, Patrick Watson, Alan White, Achyuta Bava, who were all either inspired by Robert Schmidt or read his translations to a greater or lesser extent. Right now, with Robert Schmidt's work that just sort of got reintroduced, it's a perfect time because everyone knows we're banging on this revival right now, and Robert Schmidt's discography or library of audio was just released for us, and I should have had that website on hand. I don't.
I think it's like robertschmidastrologer.com, something like that.
Yeah, and there's an
old site. Just look up Robert Schmidt astrology. I'm sure you'll find it.
Yeah, exactly. And I can put it in the links in the show notes or in the comments or something, or someone else, if you have it, you can plop it in there. But so now we've got his work available, like his audio work, because during these conclaves, they were recording, thank God, on tape. You and I and some of our friends, we studied these tapes, and they were influential to us. We got introduced to Robert Schmidt through our teacher, Achyuta Bava Dasa, who has been gracious enough to sort of introduce us to him. But as we get going into the Hellenistic period, we hear people talking about these three Roberts over and over again, right? And Robert Schmidt had translations and published some books and some papers that aren't available, But right now, which we hope they are someday, but right now you can go to the library, like the discography, and listen to a lot of his talks. I think there's courses even available that are coming out. So that was the real boom, and people really ran with it. So then we've got, you know, our modern influencers. I mean, Chris Brennan says, like, I think he said a joke or something on his channel one time, like, I don't even know, like, what people call it, Hellenistic astrology. I don't even know what that is. Chris, it's the title of your book. That's what we call it now. Hellenistic astrology.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got Chris Brennan and Demetra George is basically like extreme heavy hitters on like getting us the history, the facts, the techniques really broken down. And yeah, have I missed a little bit within that Project Hindsight, or teachers that were really influential who've gotten inspired by the three Roberts hand solar instrument?
I think that was most of the people. I'm just thinking like, just to give a bit more context, like you know, there within outside of the Hellenistic revival, there's just the traditional astrology revival that's been going on since like the 80s. So basically most of the 20th, I mean, like I said before, they really didn't have a lot of access to traditional texts at all, including later authors in the tradition, so not just Hellenistic sources. Up until really late 20th century, that wasn't really like an area of interest for most people. And then William Lilly showed up, like in the UK. People started studying William Lilly, and then, you know, that kind of started. And then, you know, then we have Project Hindsight coming up and stuff. And then now we have all of these efforts to like keep translating these texts and everything. Because basically what had happened was that these texts were only really studied within an academic context before. So like they weren't really used for like astrology. They were used for as historical documents of a time past. So, you know, to have all these people come in and then not only look at it from a historical perspective and trying to understand it within the context that it was inserted and all those things, they also were like, how do we work this? And how do we even understand astrology, the astrology that we have today based on this astrology from the past? And what are the similarities? What are the differences? So people were really just banging their head against the wall to try to figure this out. And people still continue to do this.
That's a really, really important point. And I do have here, like on my side notes, like William Lilly and Olivia Barclay. And I know Robert Zoller, again, was inspired to see people in Europe, like on, you know, Olivia Barclay and that whole movement, the Lilly people. And that is such an important point. And I think that's what contributed to just the excitement around this wave of Hellenistic astrology now, is that you know, Benjamin Dykes, in his interview with Chris Brennan, I'll link it below, made a point about saying that about Robert Zoller, which was he was practicing this stuff. Like that wasn't necessarily the thing, right? It was a historical thing. It was sort of a dead thing. Nobody was really interested in translating the zodiacal or astrological texts because they were just like this dead superstition or something, maybe in reference to like history, but even in history, it was kind of like dismissed.
And even astrologers weren't interested in looking at this stuff, you know. So that's just a whole, I mean, that's a whole tangent about the 20th century and the astrology, modern astrology, all that stuff. That's really important, but like, basically people weren't really looking for older sources in astrology because of a lot of what was happening at the time culturally, because people really wanted astrology to be like taken seriously, basically. And they thought, like you said, that word, like superstition was the label that was put on all this older stuff and blah, 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 as well as like just the like beliefs around spirituality that were happening and stuff. So that's a whole thing.
And when this stuff started getting translated, they realized that it was like applicable. There was actual practical techniques that made sense. And I think that was the sort of spark. We have so much to, you know, thank them for. They were sort of like considered to be like strict or like over the top for the modern sensibility of like astrology and sun signs in the 60s being like all, and then he comes in and he's like trying to push for these old ways, but he's investigating it in a deep way of like actually trying to apply it and see how well it works. And like we wouldn't be able to apply the things if we didn't start to do those translations and realize that there was real seeds there, real juice there to be not just pontificated over or adding to history, but a practical application. And so that's what we get when we start to do these translation projects. It's not only like with Robert Schmidt, he's done so much for my practice as far as understanding the philosophical and like oracular space. But it's not just that, right? It's not just the gods and just the oracular space. We have so many practical techniques that work so well. And so I guess that would segue into, let me just check over here that I didn't miss anything.
Yeah, just before we segue into the techniques, which I think is a really good thing to do now, I just wanted to say that a big part of this revival and a personal annoyance that I have is that it's mostly men, and especially like cis white men that did it. So like, that's not to diss any of them. I'm a big fan of Robert Schmidt. Like Elsa knows, like we both are. We like nerd out so much on Robert Schmidt. I'm a student of Chris Brennan. I'm in awe of Benjamin Dykes and how much he translates. It's great. It's so important. We could not be doing our work without this. So like just making that clear. But yeah, a lot of this perspective has lacked like other voices in this process. The only woman that we have within the Hellenistic field is Demetra, who is just, amazing and extremely important, and the queen, and just, yeah.
We love you, Demetra.
Yeah, oh my God. So Demetra is such an important figure. She was the modernist, for those who don't know, please just go look her up and read her stuff. Like her whole thing was that she was a modern astrologer at the beginning. Yeah, that's the book. There's part 2 coming soon, hopefully. So, she was a modern astrologer for like a really long time. And then she started going back into, she started to suddenly had a big twist in her narrative. And she went and looked at traditional astrology and learned Greek and did translations and was really involved in the whole reconstruction of the Hellenistic system. And she is a really good figure that carries that connection to modern astrology in a really deep way, as well as to traditional. So she just I don't know, just her very being just subverts a lot of this like academic strictness and bullshit that's kind of patriarchal that happens around all of this stuff. So like people love just getting very picky about, astrologers, that's what astrologers do. People get really picky and argumentative about like small things. But then, yeah, she's just very she just holds it all. She voices her opinions about all of these areas. She's such a amazing astrologer. Like these books that she's, the one that we have now and the one that's coming up, they're just like so important to the whole traditional revival. Like just, yes, in complete awe of her and very grateful to have her.
Yes, totally. Me too. Thank you for bringing that up. It's really important. Her work is paramount, and what she holds, the space that she holds in the field is just awe-inspiring. And I am glad you brought that up, and I want to talk about this. Maybe we'll go through the techniques and we can riff a little bit more about it at the end too, about like holding space in that oracular space like she does so well, and just holds down that sort of, I don't want to say non-linear, but just, yeah, she bridges the academic world. And just the fact that she would like go back to school and start doing her own translations. And I don't know if that was completely inspired by Project Hindsight, or if that was just the same, kind of time period where she was getting introduced to the material. But it is important to talk about privilege and access when we're talking about this kind of material, because it has been steeped in, like, even if we go back all the way to the Hellenistic tradition, or just the early days of the fact that science and medicine and even being able to read and mathematics and all of that was just such an elite space. It was such a tiny margin of people, that had those privileges and those accesses, you know, and that really carried on through the tradition. And I feel like hopefully, and our prayer and hopefully part of our contribution is to talk about those things and talk about access and just bring that into the space. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. That's a really important.
Yeah, because I think it's so important because it's so centered, like astrology is so centered around this, like traditional astrology and like Hellenistic astrology is so centered around this very academic like speech and it's very exclusionary and elitist in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings us to we thought that maybe if we did a brief overview of the history, we should just list some of the things that you can expect hearing from us on the channel. Some of the techniques we use if we are doing readings, and like what makes a Hellenistic astrologer in like a practical sense, I guess, instead of like a historical sense. So we use techniques for chart analysis. So we might not just, we'll pull up the chart or we'll calculate the chart through an ephemeris maybe. And we both laugh.
Yeah.
And then we're giving this service. We're either predicting mundane events, or we are looking at a person's birth and life, or we are with the chart, maybe we are electing for an important event, a wedding or something like this. So we pull up the chart in question, and then we do a chart analysis to sort of open the space, or even open the oracular space, let's say, and we can segue into that again later. But to keep it practical, Hellenistic astrologers use whole sign houses,
which is opposed to contrasted by other systems like quadrant systems. Okay, so basically whole sign houses, one sign is one house. If none of this makes sense to you, I'm sorry. I don't think we're going to be able to go into that much detail here, but I'm sure there's like Chris Brennan, there's a lot of resources out there. So, okay, whole sign houses, one sign is one house. So, you have the sign on the ascendant. So the ascendant sign basically being the whole first house. So the first house is the entirety of the 30 degrees of the ascendant sign. And then each house is organized like that around the wheel. Whereas quadrant systems are irregular divisions of the wheel, of the zodiac, of the circle, that follow different like astronomical, like, like rationales. But they all have in common that they are based on the 4 angles. So, you have the ascendant starting the first house, you have the IC starting the 4th house, you have the descendant starting the 7th house, and you have the midheaven starting the 10th house. And then you have the space in between those angles divided in different ways, according to the specific system, into the other houses. So they're not necessarily following like a neat pattern of like every house is 30 degrees or whatever. They follow whatever the distance is and they do their calculations. So they're like that. And then there's also like equal houses, which is just like you have the sign, you have the degree and the ascendant, and then you do 30 degrees for after that. So like 30 degrees of the next sign is the beginning of the 2nd house, and then the 3rd house, and then like that, and it just goes around. So basically Hellenistic astrologers use whole sign houses. One of the staple things about being a Hellenistic astrologer is that you probably use whole sign houses or some form of hybrid between like whole signs and quadrants. Very rare.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't a definitive every astrologer, but probably, I mean, for us, we're speaking for ourselves. We're, as Hellenists, not that we wouldn't use quadrant or equal, or we wouldn't use like different things. Maybe some people use different system for Hori or something like this. Just as an overview, Hellenistic astrologers are probably more likely, at least if they're not using it for their primary practice, they're familiar with and have been taught in the system of whole sign houses. So, and that we have like when we're talking about the ascendant, it doesn't start at 0 degrees. So the ascendant can be anywhere in that first house. And the same with the MC, can be floating through the top of the chart. It doesn't have to be culminating in the 10th house. So yeah, we don't have to get into more technicalities with that. I do use full sign houses for my natal charts. So I just will speak for myself. And then the second consideration that I'm not sure how to contrast this as far as like how moderns, and I think there's probably with this revival, like a lot of overlap. So I don't necessarily want to make it to where we're contrasting everything Hellenistic versus modern, or Hellenistic versus medieval, or versus the Arabic tradition. I think a lot of people are blending and have a really smart way of why and how they're using stuff now. But let's just move on with that little caveat saying sect. So I'm not sure how many people take this into consideration outside of the tradition, but within inside of the Hellenistic tradition, this is a primary chart consideration, is sect, meaning is it a day chart or is it a night chart? What is the sect in favor? So like, what is the team that is sort of like running the show, and what is the secondary or underlying current? So we would have the day sect or the day team, and then the night sect and the night team. And we use the 7 traditional planets. So we've got the 2 luminaries, the king and the queen, and they will determine the sect. The luminaries will determine the sect. And then we've got the rest of the traditional planets falling in line with that sect. So we've got Venus and Mars in the night sect, and then we've got Saturn and Jupiter in the day sect. And then we have Mercury, the messenger of the gods, sitting at the helm, able to sort of traverse that sect nature and switch teams, play for both teams. Should we add to that, or?
No, I think that's good. Just, I think the primacy of sect is another thing that's very important, and that's very
huge.
defining to the Hellenistic tradition.
Absolutely. And it's huge in how we look at the chart. So I don't want to just say like, oh, sect, and like, let's move on. It's like very primary, and the very first step of like how we're even going to filter the rest of this information through that, what we're about to lay out for you. I mean, sect is going to be the thing that is like a first and foremost consideration once we have calculated your chart. So traditional dignities, should we just list them? And these, we use all of these, by the way. So at least for me, even the minor dignities, I do put importance.
Yes. So the dignities is very important way to describe how a planet is doing in a chart, and it involves like 5 different considerations. It's used throughout the tradition, but in the Hellenistic tradition, it's used differently than in the others. So it's 5 dignities. So domicile, exaltation, triplicity, bound, and decan. So those are all associated to the signs and to the specific parts of the sky in which the planets are said to have more power, or at least more familiarity. That's a very important factor in interpretation.
It's super important, and we're layering those dignities. So we're saying, how is this planet in this dignity? Is it in domicile? Is it in exaltation? Is it, in its fall? Is it in detriment? 1. And then we go through almost like you're filtering like a medicine or something like this. So you're filtering the planet through all of these different dignities. And, obviously I think everyone uses the quadruplicities, but also we're looking at the signs through elements and the quadruplicities as well. Like I don't think I wrote this in our list, but we look at the quadruplicities also within the angles. So like, is it a mutable angle? Is it a fixed angle? And I mean, I'm sure that's pretty common in astrology as well, but that is like the second thing that we'll do when we're analyzing a chart as Hellenistic astrologers. We'll go through the dignities, we'll check out the angles in the dignities, planets and signs with the dignities. And then
just to clarify, it's the triplicities with the elements, but sorry.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Okay, so then we have the whole sign aspects. So that's a big deal.
Big deal.
When we're looking at degree-based aspects, we're looking at like the orb of aspects. We're looking at 3 degrees or 1 degree or 13 degrees for the moon. For whole sign aspects, we are, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit on this too, is just from house to house. Like the 7th house, the most primary easy example is the opposition between the 1st house and the 7th house. Anywhere in that house, if we have a planet, we have a whole sign aspect. So we have it has to do with seeing, being able to communicate. What type of communication that is would be what type of aspect it is, like the opposition, the trine, the sextile, the square.
So basically, whole sign aspects are, they say that the aspects are fundamentally based in the dynamic between signs, so the relationships between signs. So if you have signs of the same modality, so let's say, I don't know, like Scorpio and Aquarius, which are fixed signs, between them we have a square relationship. And that is relevant to planets within those signs, independently of where they fall within that sign. So independently of them being very close by degree, that 90 degree associated with the square. So let's say we have like, I don't know, the sun really early Scorpio, and then you have Saturn really late Aquarius. And then they, even though they're not close by degree, they, by sign, they have a relationship, and that's very important. So that's a very defining thing in Hellenistic astrology. Orbs are not used as much as because they it's only like smaller orbs that we consider in general. But yeah, so that's the primacy of the whole sign aspects. And like Elsa was saying, they are associated with sight, with the concept of sight. So if you have planets that are aspecting each other by sign and by degree also, but especially if it's in sign, you can say that the planets are seeing each other. So they're capable of having a relationship. And then aversion, which is the lack of relationship between planets. So aversions would be the what is it, the quincunx and like the semi-sextile of the modern aspects.
I don't know.
Yeah, so it's like the signs that are next to the planet in a specific sign. So like if you have
the flanking signs,
the flanking signs on either side, and then the flanking sides on either side of the sign on the opposition, they would be signs that we would say are in aversion to a specific sign. So they don't.
Yeah, like no line of sight. Like if something's on either side of you, it's like kind of like in your blind spot or something like this. So we less of an opportunity to communicate, or less of an opportunity to even see or influence. Sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
No, yeah, it's like a lack of relationship. So aspects are about relationship. Aversion is when there's a lack of relationship. It's not considered an aspect, but it's something that is related to aspects.
And it's still a consideration. Yeah, so I don't know how it's considered in other forms, and I can't elaborate on that thoughtfully, but it is still a consideration for us. Like aversion means a lot. It's not just like, oh, they, discard it because it's an aversion. No, it has an interpretive value as well with the aversion, and a strong one.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of aversions.
Yeah, I mean, they can be awesome if you're looking at like trying to do a magical election or something, and like that planet can't talk, you can't see, it's like out of the picture. So I mean,
not in the sense that I think that they're good necessarily, but just in the sense I think they're such a rich concept, like an interpretation. They give a lot of information.
Agreed. And we can probably, let's do like a whole episode on talking about the ins and outs.
Yeah, that would be great.
Aversion. That'd be, So then we have like sight through sympathy. I mean, these get a little bit more like in depth as we're going, but I just wanted to say that for people who are coming here as Hellenistic astrologers, they're going to be interested in this, and for people who are maybe dabbling or just curious, it does seem obscure, but these are the factors that we take into consideration as Hellenistic astrologers. It is a lot. I mean, it's not like we're just like taking in a few considerations. So then after aversion, we have like different sight through sympathy, reception, antitia, counter antitia. So these are all other layers of that aspect theory or doctrine that we are working with.
Yeah.
And then let's see, we have like the overcoming the superior and inferior position. That also would have to do with like the relationship of aspect.
Just like a tiny thing on the superior and inferior. So that's just referring to like which planet is affecting the other. So they're not seen as equally powerful within an aspect relationship. Superior and inferior aspects refer to them, one impacting the other more than the other impacts the other one.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That is a perfect explanation. And so then we have things like planetary speed and synodic cycle that we also take into consideration when we're evaluating the planets. So that's a pretty important one. And that's a really deep one. And we don't need to totally get into that. Do you have anything you want to say about it?
I mean, it just speed is like how fast, if a planet is fast, it's associated with one thing. If it's slow, it's associated with a different thing. Like retrogrades, which are part of the synodic cycle, are important. When planets station and when they show up, like when they become first visible and when they disappear, those are all things that are important. So I think an important thing to say about this is that it's all based on the living experience of the sky. So this isn't about, so this is, even though this is theoretical on some level, it's also to do with like, what are the planets doing like visibly in the sky? Is a planet still? Is a planet showing up at all? Like, is it visible? Is it not visible? Is it like above the chart? Is it like above our heads in the sky? Is it below the earth? All those things are very, very important to traditional astrology in general, but the Hellenistic tradition also.
So, all right, synodic cycles, the visibility of the planets, and now we've got timing techniques beyond transits. So transits are, I think, primary in every astrological tradition, but we do have some unique timing techniques that are sort of introduced in the Hellenistic period and that Hellenistic astrologers will know about or dabble with or learn, or you will see some people using them to a greater or lesser extent. So we have time lords and we have lots, and we have this incredible thing called zodiacal releasing.
Yeah. So like time, time lords, the concept of time lords is very, very important to Hellenistic astrology, because it's basically saying that specific periods of time are governed by like planets. So they're not techniques that include, I mean, they include transits, so like what the planets are doing right now, but they're mostly symbolic times. So they are some form of progression of the chart in some way, some form of symbolic moving from one thing into another. That's all completely based on the natal chart that divides the life up into periods. Those are time lords, and they are very, very crucial in the way that we interpret a specific time period, just in timing considerations. And they are one of the most important part of the recoveries that we've made through the revival of Hellenistic astrology. Because even though you have some of that in the later like tradition, not necessarily modern, it's definitely like you really have that as a big, big part of Hellenistic astrology. So there's like tons of Time Lord techniques. They all intersect with one another. It's a very interesting and also complex system that's kind of it's kind of stressful, but it's also extremely important, and just gives a lot of insight. Those are more or less the general, like, standardized techniques. If you read specific texts, they will speak of techniques that are maybe specific to that one author or to, like, so it's not necessarily like a homogeneous field that everyone is like using the exact same techniques in the exact same way in terms of the source text, but this is more or less what has been pieced together from the pieces that we have on the tradition. So it's complicated, and there are a lot of different factors to consider, and that's one of the most important parts of just traditional astrology in general, but definitely Hellenistic too, that you just have to you just have to look at a chart. There's very much a method that's used. There's techniques that are used that have to be checked before you make a judgment. It's very structured in that way. So that's one of the things that makes astrology traditional astrology become both valued as well as getting a bit of a bad rep in general, is just this emphasis on the technical aspect, and it's not straight. Robert Schmidt says this about how Hellenistic astrology isn't necessarily something that requires a intuitive mind for you to use. So it's an apparatus that's mostly I hesitate to use this word, but like rational, or like on some level.
Can we say systematic?
Yeah, it's a very systematic method. It's a method. It's not you sitting there and feeling into. It's not complete. Okay, it's not completely based and dependent upon you feeling things when you're looking at a chart. So it's not based on intuition. It's not founded on intuition. That's something that can be added into it, but the foundation is a very system that is a very structured system that requires a lot of rigor to like actually put into practice, and that allows you to get very specific information out of the chart as well. So and then we have those what's the word, analogies of astrology being like a language, and that's very much what we see here. It's very much just like you have all these different components, you have to piece them together to make a delineation, and that comes before you even think about trying to feel something and trying to.
I think talking about the system and moving into like, let's say, intuition or even like psychic, or it's not us doing something, it's us working a system of filters to sort of, in my estimation, make space or open the possibility for oracular space, open the possibility of that transformative experience happening in the native or in us, but it's not dependent on that. In fact, the oracular space that's made available is made available through working the system, through those rigors, and it makes it possible to have a precise and individual and super authentic experience of the oracular space.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with that idea of using the techniques to arrive at a space and to have that as a way of breaking us down so that we can then receive the information. I think that's very much the case, and that's probably how they even thought of it in the original times, because they did not have a split between like rationality and intuition, or whatever, however you want to call that, like division. It was very much an alive thing. And even though they were doing all these calculations, because, they had to do all this by hand as well. So they had to like draw charts, they had to like calculate the periods, they had to basically be mathematicians to be an astrologer up until like, 50 years ago. So basically, like, it's they didn't have that division, they didn't have that split, and so having those considerations wasn't seen as a cut and dry thing. It was just like, their scientific methods were not how we understand science today. They were more they were not separate from spirit or like all those other aspects. So that's a very important part of the tradition to acknowledge as well, because it gets framed in this like dry, fatalistic, unemotional, uncaring way nowadays a lot of the time. And that's not necessarily the case. And plus, like, how you're going to deliver that information to someone and how you're going to bring that up in a session, all of those things are a whole other conversation as well. So it's not just, we're talking about like interpretation. It's not about like how to be caring and how to hold safe space for people. So that's a whole other field. So yeah.
And let's do a video a little bit more about that oracular space and like how we can hold space, in these times for people, and as personal astrologers, how we view it. I also just want to add one more little thing about that is a safe space for me personally, is that I don't need, like, I can trust the tradition and I can trust the chart to speak. I don't have to turn on my psychic powers. I don't have to, like, it's not me having to like perform something for this person who is in need, like, or in desire of this natal chart reading, for example. I can trust the techniques and trust the chart and then see what arises. It's not a pressure on Elsa. It's a reliance on the system and trusting that it has something to say that's living and moving in every moment, and that I get to bear witness to it. I get to be a part of it and try to be a clear channel for it as best I can for the person or for the event or for the, you know, prediction or whatever it is that we're like looking to do. And for me, that yeah, that clears the way in a way that's just really important for me. It's really it's like I don't have to be psychic. I don't have to know. I can rely on the techniques. I can rely on my teachers and the wisdom tradition to reveal itself for me and for us, for that communion.
Yeah, I second that very strongly.
Nice. So does this wrap us up?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've covered it.
Okay, cool. So thank you all for being here for our like kind of first, I know we did actually put out a video prior to this, like a little magical animation that we did with our friend Soul, and thank you for that, Soul. What else should we say? You know, comment below. Anyone from our study group, hi guys, comment below. You also have, you know, you're super active on Instagram. I don't have like a website or I think I like started an Instagram for Hellenistic Astrology that I'm gonna try to follow up with, so you can find it over on Instagram, but you're not gonna see like a whole lot happening there yet. This is the primary space that I'm going to focus on, just starting to get going. But you do a lot in Portuguese and maybe as well as English. Tell us a little bit about your Instagram, if you have a website, like all of that.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm a Brazilian astrologer. I live in Brazil. My life happens in Brazil. So I have an Instagram page for those of you that speak Portuguese and for some reason they're here. It's called Eixo Terra Céu, and it's I do like predictions. I do like I write on the transits. I do like I write also about the concepts, like to explain them to people and stuff. I collaborate on videos there as well, on IGTV videos. So that's like where I do most of my work. And yeah, for those of you that speak English, which is probably most people here, I'm sorry, I don't really have much for you guys, but maybe one day.
It's okay. I mean, we'll do stuff here. Like this is our outlet for that essentially. And you can always just follow Lo on there. I mean, I follow you, and I just click the C translation, like, you know,
you actually do that. That's sweet.
Of course. Yeah. Are you kidding? Yeah. So I mean, it's fun to follow anyways, and I honestly think that what you and David Fisher from what is it, In the First Place, the fact that you guys are bringing all this super high quality stuff to Portuguese speaking areas is amazing. And I know that David's also working on translations, and I think it's just a beautiful thing. So even if it's just for support and you just kind of want to support people working in, you know, bilingual spaces, follow over there. And follow here,
I do.
Like,
yeah, I do offer readings, so like, you know, that I can do that in English, no problem. So, you know, if anyone's interested or anything like that, I would love to. So yeah, I'm available.
Yeah, so you can find on IG. And do you have a website for booking readings?
No, I'll post. I'll leave my email address below, as well as my Instagram account, so you guys can find it if you guys are interested.
Yeah, I'll link that for myself too. I have a couple things that I'm going to be offering as far as readings, and with the channel just coming out, I'm gonna do a bunch of sliding scale stuff and like opportunity for like marginalized groups to sort of set their price as well, so that I can just get into this space and build a relationship with the astrological community through like showing what I do in my readings and stuff like that. So I'll put right now I'm just doing email because I don't have that much space to take on like a full-on website clientele at the moment. But yeah, we'll both put our emails down there. You can just hit us up for a reading. And yeah, follow us, like, subscribe, check out our algorithm. All right. Thank you for doing this so much today, Lo. I don't know. It would have been a daunting task to do alone, and you were the perfect person for it. So thank you for offering and talking about the importance of doing a video like this. And I'm so happy we did it.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to. And yeah, very up for doing a lot more in the future. So.
Hey, good. All right. Bye, guys.
Okay, bye.